Hello, it's Larry Clark with another Meet the Composer episode with Excelsior Music Publishing. And today I'm talking to composer Michael Miller, along with band director Eric Mordhorst. Hi, Eric and Mike. How's it going?
It's going well. Thanks, Larry.
Good morning, Larry. Thank you for having us.
You're welcome. So, Eric, go to it and ask Mike all the questions you're dying to know the answers to that your students want, and off we go.
All right. Good morning, Mike. It's so great to be here. Just want to start with a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to college? Your primary instrument? And, where do you live now?
Well, I'm originally from a town in upstate New York called New Hartford. And I grew up there, and I went off from there to Syracuse University, which is not too far away, where I got a bachelor's in music education, and then immediately moved to Gainesville, Florida, to attend the University of Florida, which is where I got my master's in conducting. Growing up, I studied the violin and the piano, and I sang in a school choir and a church choir, and then eventually trumpet became my primary instrument. And currently, I live in Newnan, Georgia, which is just outside of Atlanta.
Okay. I have a couple students who've switched from orchestra instruments to band instruments, and I find that kind of interesting. What grade did you switch?
So I started violin, I want to say, in second grade. And, in my elementary school, I think we started band in fifth grade. But I missed out on that first year. So I saw all of my friends doing it in fifth grade, and I got really jealous. So I didn't actually start the switch over to band until sixth grade.
And you came over to the dark side.
I did. Yeah, I did. Uh-huh.
So how about a little bit about your career path? Have you always been a composer? Have you had any other positions in the music industry?
So I guess I should start with when I was going through college. It's around about when I started the marching band arranging stuff. So that was really, I guess, my first, let's call it a career in music while I was in school. But while I was in school for music education, right? So I began officially in the music business as a band director. I taught for 2 years at Weeki Wachee High School in Weeki Wachee, Florida, which, yes, is a real place. And then I moved to Texas for a year and taught at Robert Vela High School in Edinburgh, Texas, and then came back to Florida and taught for 5 years at Newsom High School. And then after that fifth year at Newsom, my family moved for my wife's job, and since then I've been a stay-at-home freelance composer and arranger. So that is my history thus far in this great business.
Okay. So I'm peppering in some questions from me, some from my students, and one of them that they were asking was, when did you discover your love for music? And, as a lot of us do, we can name teachers in our past who inspired us. Do you have any teachers who you remember who you sort of credit with your sort of start in this business?
Oh, sure. And there's probably too many to name. But I would say if there was a time when I remember being really inspired by music, it was probably around about 7 or 8 years old. My brother and I used to perform in community theater. And that's where I really started to kind of get a love of performance. I remember being in The Music Man, and then The Sound of Music. That was like the big one growing up. Mm-hmm. And like I mentioned, I also sang in a church choir at Grace Church Episcopal Church in Utica, New York. And I had a really fantastic choral director by the name of Larry Tremsky. And he was definitely a huge inspiration to me growing up. And then band in middle school was another important time, I think, in my musical upbringing. I had a lot of unbridled energy, probably like most middle schoolers do, right? And it was kind of the energy and the noise levels of band that really started to focus me, for lack of a better term.
I have a couple of trumpet players with unbridled energy, for sure. And they probably know I'm talking to them right now. Right.
I think they would say you just added them.
Yeah. Yes.
Uh, and then I guess just to finish that conversation, you know, high school band was another important time for me. It was the kind of the social aspect, like most of marching band, and I also that's when I started participating in drum corps too. Um, and you know, my middle school band director Marty Hollister, my high school band director Mike DeMeo, and actually one of my high school guidance counselors, you know, was the drill designer for my high school marching band. His name is Rick Morey, and he was also the drill designer for the Syracuse Brigadiers, which was the first drum corps that I marched in
Wow.
as a kid. All of those guys were super inspirational to me growing up. And yeah, I mean, just the countless instructors and private lessons teachers. Those were the people that, you know, were more like family to me than instructors really. And I think it was that kind of that communal aspect of music at a young age that really stoked my love for it.
Yeah, and I think that family aspect, that's a really beautiful thing that needs to be talked about school band and school music. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, the fact that a lot of us directors right now and our kids are all missing each other, and it's wonderful that you bring that up. So another interesting question from the kids. If you weren't a musician, what do you think you would be doing?
So I have this like fleeting of being a really young boy and wanting to be a pilot. My grandfather on my mom's side was a pilot his whole life. So I think I aspired to kind of be like him and be a pilot. And then music just happened, right? Like all of those ensembles and teachers that I had were super inspirational. And from, you know, probably from middle school onward, it was just always music. I don't think I ever made a conscious choice like to go into music, but it just happened and it worked out.
Wow, I bet there's a lot of people who can relate to that sentiment.
Yeah.
When did you start composing? What was your first composition?
So I don't remember what my first composition was necessarily, but I would say I think it was like sixth or seventh grade. My dad had gotten me this like really basic laptop. It was like when laptops started to become a thing. And I had one of the early versions of Finale. And I remember just kind of like, you know, plugging things into Finale and just seeing how different sounds worked. And also too, I used to take the 4-part hymns from our church choir and like arrange them for like string quartet or brass quartet, and just, yeah, again, just kind of experimenting with different combinations of instruments.
And so I know that you write for a lot of different sorts of ensembles. Do you have one that's your favorite to write for?
It's got to be band, really. I just think the amount of hours that I spent in a band room growing up, it just has a special place in my heart. And I think, you know, there's just a lot of different colors that you can use in the band world that I don't think you can get everywhere else.
Oh wow. Do you have sort of favorite combinations of instruments that you like to compose for within the band setting?
Yeah, I mean, I by no means like claim ownership of these. It's just it's been used, but like the low clarinet, French horn, euphonium combination, then like that muted trumpet oboe sound, that kind of crossover sound. Yeah, just different things like that where you can experiment, and you know, certain instruments work really well together and others don't, of course.
Right. Like cooking, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So of your pieces that you've written, do you have a favorite?
I do, and it's a piece we're actually going to talk about here a little bit more a little later here in this conversation. But it's my piece Seconds, which is coming out in just a few months here with Excelsia. And the reason that piece is probably my favorite and the piece I'm most proud of is because it's authentically me. I don't think a composer ever finds his or her voice, but I think this is one of the first pieces that I've composed where I really start to see and hear my compositional voice developing. Like I mentioned, I've done a lot of arranging, be it marching band or other things. So I think a lot of the times, like most composers, I would imagine, I find myself imitating other composers. And then, of course, when you're arranging, you know, you have to make your arrangements sound real enough, or true enough, I should say, to the original source material. So for me personally, I always struggle sounding original or authentic, but I really do feel like Seconds is my voice.
And the piece is stunning, and yes, we're gonna speak about it in a little bit, and I'm glad that we are. It's absolutely incredible. So
Thank you.
I'm glad they bring it up. In your compositional process, because you know, I know a lot of us have been home watching videos, and I've been watching videos about composers and their process, and some people use a computer, some people just have a piano, and some people draw while they work. And do you have what is your process?
Mine is pretty simple and straightforward. I'm almost always at the computer. See, I got my piano right here behind me. And then, you know, I use a combination of software. My concert band stuff is done almost exclusively on Finale. Same thing with like the symphonic orchestra stuff, or if I'm writing for a chamber ensemble. Sibelius, I use pretty much exclusively for anything pageantry, whether it's a marching band show or an indoor wind show or a drum and bugle corps show. And then I use a good bit of Logic Pro when I'm doing some sound design or sound editing or mixing or things along those lines.
So a good amount of technology is involved.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
And when you're looking at that blank screen, I'm sure that it's sort of a tough thing for a lot of people. That blank screen, you're about to start a new piece. What comes first?
It really depends. Oftentimes it's a tune. And, you know, sometimes that'll just pop into my head, or other times I'll just sit down at the piano and play. Sometimes it's a rhythmic idea or some other kind of device like an ostinato or what have you. But yeah, it's sometimes it's organic and it just comes to you, you know, out walking the dog or something. Or if I'm bored, I'll sit down and play, and I'll play something and be like, oh, this is kind of cool. Let's see where this goes.
Oh, wow. Okay. And my students were asking, key signature, time signature, how do you determine those?
Well, I think the key signature, by and large, is determined by what's practical for the ensemble. So I think I kind of begin with a key in mind. Like if I'm writing for a band, obviously, especially younger bands, we're going to probably be somewhere in the realm of B flat, E flat, or F, right? And sometimes that adjusts. You get into the piece and the range of the melody, or certain harmonies, you might need to lower it or raise it. So that's key signature. And then time signature, I think that reveals itself. Again, that can depend a little bit on what and who you're writing for. But I often find myself tweaking time signatures, right? Because you can write the same thing in really a variety of time signatures.
Right.
So, yep.
And what would you say is the biggest challenge of composing?
I would say when writing for young band or younger ensembles, doesn't have to be a band, I would say adhering to the publishing guidelines, right? Because you know, you kind of have to stick to certain ranges or certain rhythms, certain key signatures or time signatures. So that can become a challenge. My hat is off to, you know, the masters of the young band composition craft, because it's tough. It's a lot more difficult than people might think. But also I would say in terms of challenges, just in general, going back to the idea of sounding like yourself and not sounding like X composer. We're all, as composers, we're all inspired by great masters of the craft. And it's very easy to imitate and start to sound like somebody else, which it isn't necessarily a bad thing. But at the same time, you know, you kind of have to find your own language and your own voice.
I guess it's a lot like teaching, is you're going to be a little bit of this, a little bit of that, all of the teachers that you've had. Do you have, now that you mentioned inspirations, do you have composers that have inspired you, that a lot of some of your style comes from? Favorite movie soundtracks, favorite musical soundtracks, things like that?
Oh boy. Yeah. Probably too many. too many to name. But, you know, I grew up in the 90s largely. So composers like Frank DeKelly, you know, the composers that we all grew up playing in our school band setting were super inspirational to me, for sure.
Wow. So I want to talk a little bit about seconds. And
Okay.
one of my students wrote, "Seconds is very beautiful, strong, powerful, and emotional." Would you please tell us about your inspiration for this piece?
Sure. So before I talk about the inspiration, I'll just kind of give you a personal anecdote. I started writing the piece while I was at, I think it was like solo and ensemble when I was a band director, and I was sitting up in a library, you know, just kind of waiting for the day to wrap up, waiting for like the ratings to come in. And I had my laptop there and I was writing. And I was just kind of inspired by all of the like hundreds of band students that were at this school for the Solo and Ensemble Festival. But the real inspiration and dedication of the piece is actually for victims of gun violence. Music and the music classroom has always been really special to me because it's like we were talking about before, it's a family atmosphere where you know, we can all come together and just kind of block out the outside world. And you know, in my 8 years as a band director, there had been a good number of mass shootings, and several at schools. So this was kind of my coping mechanism for that. I think a lot of times when tragedy strikes us as musicians, we turn to our instrument, or composers, we turn to writing music. And I always go back to that Leonard Bernstein quote of, "This will be our reply to violence, to make music more intensely, more beautifully, more devotedly than ever before." So again, this was my way of coping with those extremely unfortunate events.
And a lot of great art seems to come out of those sort of things.
Sure.
I have the feeling in a couple months there's going to be a lot of new compositions out there, and I'm already seeing art pouring out everywhere online.
Oh yeah.
Now, also in the title of Seconds, this is something that I've also really enjoyed too, because there's a few facets of the title, right?
Yeah.
If you could tell us a little about that.
Sure. So I would always get accused by my students of making really bad dad jokes and making just terrible puns, and that's fine. You know, that's what we do.
That's a band director thing. They teach us that in college, right? Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
But yeah, so seconds, right? So not just the idea of like the precious seconds of our life, but also just literally like the seconds of a clock. So I use the tempo blocks to make like a tick-tock effect. And I try to rely a lot on the dissonance created by major and minor seconds. So there's also, to that end, a very literal representation of seconds throughout the piece.
And I know that as we've worked on it as a band, we've really enjoyed that. And it's really created a lot of great teaching moments where we could talk about what minor seconds and major seconds sound like, and the emotions that they create. Because a piece is certainly emotional. I hear in this piece, I hear pensive, I hear hope for the future at the key change. I hear a lot of things, and we've had a lot of really, really great discussions about that. And something that I actually noticed recently too is the very last word that's printed in the score. And I'm not sure if it was a conscious choice to put that word in there, and it's morendo.
Yeah, definitely,
You
for
know,
sure. Yeah.
literally dying. You know, there were a couple of tears shed in that discussion, which I think is a beautiful thing about what we do, is that we can connect with other people through the music, and you've allowed us to do that through this piece. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Do you find that Seconds is especially apropos in light of the global situation right now?
Oh, definitely. I mean, going back to that idea of hopefulness, I think whether it's, you know, a tragic shooting or anything else that we as musicians, and especially young students, are struggling with, just having that something beautiful and uplifting to play. Even though, you know, there's certainly the darker moments in that piece. the hopeful moments are something that we can turn to during those times.
Yeah, the hopeful moments, the suspensions followed by the quiet little clarinet moment. It's interesting because I've been doing lessons online with kids, and we're giving them a choice to play whatever they want to play on a Zoom lesson. And the overwhelming majority of they're just picking out seconds. They're like, I'm going to play seconds out of everything that we have. So it's either relating to their lives right now, or they just enjoy playing the music, or maybe both.
Awesome.
Yeah. Moving on to one of your other pieces that I've been working on with the sixth grade band. Totally different, right? Throne of Swords.
Yep.
Tell us a little about Throne of Swords.
Probably 2 or 3 years ago, my wife and I got into the HBO series Game of Thrones, which probably isn't so appropriate for sixth grade band students, but, as we do sometimes, we write music that will be attracted to certain audiences. And Game of Thrones was really hip, like I said, 2 or 3 years ago. This is just kind of my take on that whole like feudal system where you have people trying to overthrow one another to take the throne away. So it has that kind of feel to it. It doesn't sound anything like the soundtrack to Game of Thrones, of course.
Right.
But that was just kind of the underlying premise of that piece.
I'm a big fan. I mean, I think you could probably see in the shot, I've got a sword from Game of Thrones up on my wall there.
Oh, yeah.
It's Jon Snow's sword. So I understand, I'm a fan as well. But it's interesting because it isn't music that you can usually pull out and play with sixth graders. But the feel is there of that sort of medieval wartime society, right?
Yeah.
And that's a piece that the sixth graders have really, really enjoyed playing as well. I find it to be very accessible for them. I find it to be something they enjoy playing. And they wanted to know, actually, about both of the pieces. The question came up, how long did it take you to write these pieces? What's this, how's it from start to finish?
Well, I would say like the initial composition of both of those pieces probably took a couple of weeks, maybe 2 to 3 weeks, just to lay out the basic form. The editing process, both, so I finished the first draft of the piece, put it away for a couple of days or a couple of weeks and going back to it. And then also the editing process of like, hey, Larry Clark, like take a look at this piece, tell me what you think. And then, that he or any publisher will send back information and you just kind of have a back and forth about it. So I don't know, all in all, from start to finish, as you asked, probably a year is a safe estimate. Yeah.
So it is a significant undertaking, which a lot of people probably don't realize. I guess it's like anything else, the polish that takes a long time.
Yes. Well, and we're very fortunate here at Excelsior, the composers of Excelsior, to have both Larry and Tyler as resources, because like I said, we almost never ever do we send them a piece and they're like, this is perfect, right? Like there's always, it's a living, breathing document, and there's a good amount of back and forth. And I think our team here at Excelsior does just an absolutely fantastic job of finding the best version of each piece.
I imagine that to be the case. I mean, I know a lot of us have played Larry Clark's music for years and years and years, and our kids have done it. So I imagine he's a really great sort of teammate there.
He knows what works. Yeah.
Moving on to something that you kind of mentioned before. There's a lot of DCI fans out there. And I know I always love hearing drum corps stories. I have a friend who goes on tour, and I love hearing it all summer, and I love going to shows. And so can you tell us a little bit about your involvement with drum corps and the Colts?
Sure. Well, going all the way back to ninth grade, I started marching in drum corps while I was still in school. And I marched with the Syracuse Brigadiers, which was an all-age drum and bugle corps. I marched with them from 2001 to 2005, and I played mellophone. And that was back when some drum corps still used G bugles. So it was a G bugle mellophone, which was a lot of fun. And then after that, I marched with the Boston Crusaders, drum and bugle corps in DCI, played trumpet for a year, and then was one of the conducting drum majors for a year. And I took a year off from drum corps, and then I actually taught a drum corps called the Blue Stars from La Crosse, Wisconsin in 2009. I was a visual technician. And then I took a long hiatus from drum corps when I really got serious into teaching high school. But a few years ago, I got back into the activity. And yeah, like you mentioned, Eric, right now I work with the Colts drum and bugle corps from Dubuque, Iowa. I started on there in 2018 as a brass technician, working largely with the high brass and the trumpets. And I enjoy doing that very much. And I was fortunate at the end of last season to be asked to sign on as the brass arranger. So, unfortunately, our season this summer was canceled in light of the coronavirus, as everything else has been, of course. But we're already looking forward into next summer and getting the ball rolling for that. So it's a great organization and great activity to be a part of.
I feel like the 2021 season of drum corps is going to blow all of our minds because everyone's got another year to plan for it if we want to look at the silver lining, right?
Right.
So you've been involved in all ends of this, visual, arranging, brass. It's clearly something that occupies a large part of your life. Do you find that you're doing other composing while you're on tour, or is tour just completely all-consuming?
No, I do a good amount of composing and arranging when I'm on tour. In the summer, that's generally when we're gearing up towards fall marching band season. So I think the bulk of my work when I'm on the road is marching band arranging. But sometimes you just need to kind of put that away, and just composing something original is often a really good release or cleansing process for lack of a better term.
That makes a lot of sense. We need to have a little variety at all times, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
So now my students, along with all of these students, they're home right now. They can't make music with their peers, and it's probably something that a lot of people are missing a lot. Do you have any words of advice for ways in which our students can be making music right now and keeping it in their lives?
Sure. There was a really great video put out a few weeks ago by the folks at Avon High School. And I want to kind of give a nod to that. And basically the premise of that video was that your instrument is always there for you, right? You're happy, you're sad, you're mad, whatever, you can say it through your instrument. So I think that's important to remember, that even though you're not with, your band or your orchestra, your chorus friends, you can still make music, even if it's by yourself. Or maybe it's just listening to music. Listening to music is extremely therapeutic. So find the music that matches the mood that you're in, or find music that is the mood that you're not in, but the mood that you want to get to, right?
Yeah, that makes
exactly.
sense. Yeah.
But also too, in this time, there's a lot of virtual music happening. There's this app called the Acapella app, where you can record yourself playing the first clarinet part, and then record yourself playing the second clarinet part and the third clarinet part. And then you kind of layer those videos together, and you're kind of a one-man band or a one-man orchestra or whatever. So just whatever it is, just keep doing music and keep making music, because this time will eventually end. And music will always be there for you.
Music as therapy. I know that I'm feeling that now. I know I've been sight reading a lot of Bach because I'm finding that just playing right notes and wrong notes, right rhythms, wrong rhythms right now, it's sort of comforting. That's right or that's wrong. And so, that's what I've been finding, and I'm sure that students are finding other things that are appealing to them. Maybe they're downloading Broadway music. Maybe they're, looking at other things, not necessarily just their band music, but things that they can play to make them comfortable. So
sure.
Appreciate that advice to the kids there.
Yep.
Moving on to something, I guess, a little lighter. What do you like to do in your free time?
I like to go to the gym. I like to exercise. And then I also just like being outside. I like to go for walks or jog or something. We've been very fortunate this past year. My wife and I, we fostered a friend's dog while they're off doing some research overseas. So I've always wanted a dog. So it's been really nice to take the dog out for walks. I probably take the dog for more walks than it wants, but that's fine.
Okay. He doesn't have that choice, right? Fostering a dog, it's having a dog without all the commitment, right?
That's right. That's
Right.
Although we're looking at giving her back here probably in like a week or two, so I know that it's going to be a little heartbreaking.
Oh, that is going to be tough. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, hopefully you'll be able to visit, right?
Right. Exactly.
And as far as music you like to listen to, what's your favorite music to listen to?
I'm super eclectic, I guess, as I think we all are. I guess from like a turn on the radio perspective, my go-to is Billy Joel. I had the great opportunity of seeing him in concert in the Carrier Dome at Syracuse University growing up. If I'm at the gym, I like to listen to a little bit of Avicii or some other kind of like hard-hitting electronic music. That gets you amped up a little bit.
Yeah.
Classical music, I'm just a sucker for the greats like Beethoven and Mozart. Their music has lived on for a reason. It's super moving. I listen to, sorry?
It stood the test of time.
Oh,
right?
for sure.
Yeah.
Yep. From a modern music standpoint, you mentioned earlier some soundtrack music, and there's just some really cool stuff happening. In this kind of like Netflix boom, even if I'm not watching a series, I'll like turn on the first episode and just to hear like the title track. And so like Westworld has a really cool soundtrack. And then I mentioned Game of Thrones before. My favorite band piece, like concert band piece, I thought a lot about this, and I don't know that I can pick one just because there are so many great pieces out there. And then as far as movie soundtracks go, I am a huge Hans Zimmer fan. Like Inception, Interstellar, it's just epic.
People who haven't listened to Hans Zimmer should listen to Hans Zimmer.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
And another question for my students that's sort of a deceptively simple question. What is your favorite note?
F sharp.
Okay.
I like F sharp. Yeah.
And do you have a favorite key signature? And if you do, why for either of those?
So key signatures, I don't know that I have a favorite one. I think I gravitate more towards the flat key signatures. And I think, again, that's a byproduct of the band world, right? Because we play in B flat and E flat and F so often. But I would say in line with that, I really do enjoy like C minor and G minor. I don't know why. If I sit down and just play at the piano, I'm going to end up in one of those two keys, I think.
Maybe young bands just sound good in C minor and G minor. They sound good.
And I think there's a point there because, right, so like B flat is the band key, right? And G minor would be the relative of that, and E flat is also a great band key, and C minor is the relative of that. So I think it has a lot to do with my own like musical experience growing up.
The context. Yeah.
Yep.
Here comes the hardest hitting question of the whole interview. From one of my sixth graders. Plain or pepperoni?
Pepperoni, yes. Pepperoni pizza is my jam. Yep. That's funny.
You had a definite answer for that. Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
So now we're just kind of wrapping this up here. What words of advice would you offer to students considering music as a career? Advice to future composers? Advice to music students who are not planning a career in music?
Well, first of all, for someone that's looking to go into music professionally, I would say be the very best that you can be. Don't worry so much about what other people are doing. I mean, do from the standpoint of you want to know what's out there and be inspired by people that are doing what you want to do at a high level. But don't, artists, we are so introspective. We think so much about ourselves and what we're doing and what we're creating. that sometimes we get caught up in comparing ourselves to others. And just know that your path is going to be your path, and you might take longer to develop your skills than other people, and just keep getting better at what you're doing, regardless of what you see or hear around you. Especially in the age of social media, right? Because we can all be very, very flashy on social media.
Right.
So I think that tends to give a lot of us a complex sometimes. So just block out as much of that noise and just be authentically yourself.
So it's a real growth mindset as far as you're concerned. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then I would say for those not going into music as a profession, I would say find as many ways to still make music. Most every university or college you go to is going to have some kind of ensemble. If you're not at a large scale major, Division I type university that has 3 campus bands, there's probably like a pop music ensemble or a show choir or something. Just keep making music and never stop making music, or at the very least, appreciating music, listening to music, going to concerts, going to shows. You can be a music consumer if not, a music performer. Just remember that music is a universal language. Music says what words can't say, and that again, like you mentioned earlier on the call, Eric, it is extremely therapeutic. Music will always be there for you. It'll be there for you in the highest of times and the lowest of times. So just keep it around and keep it involved in your life as much as possible.
Wonderful words of advice. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I will say that it's been a real highlight of my professional and personal life over the last couple of years, working with you and getting to know you and your music. And I think that my students and myself have all benefited from this sort of relationship that we've nurtured here. And it's something that a lot of band directors, I would definitely encourage them to do. Try to get in there with composers and work through the process with them. It's something we've really enjoyed.
Well, and I would say a couple things to that. And first of all, thank you for entrusting me, to work with your students. And we should also point out and just say a public thank you to Mr. Dave Abrams, mutual friend that connected us.
Yes.
And that's really what music is about, right? I've learned, especially in the past few years, that music is more about the people that you make music with than the actual music itself. So there's also that. So thank you, Eric, for spending the time today.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you both, Michael and Eric, for giving of your time, and hopefully your students will get something out of it, Eric. And I hope that students and band directors all over the country will watch this and get something out of that and learn more about your music, Michael. So we appreciate it greatly. And we'll sign off. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Bye.